Today, we're going to dig into a feeling that I think is uniquely modern, this background anxiety that the world just doesn't quite make sense anymore. We're going to trace its roots using a really fascinating paper by the psychoanalyst Stefano Carta to uncover the deep historical currents that have shaped what we might call the paranoid mind. You know that feeling, right? That sense of being completely overwhelmed, of fragmentation, the feeling that the story of your life and the story of the world just isn't holding together the way it's supposed to. But here's the kicker. What if this feeling isn't some kind of personal failure? What if, as the source material for this explainer argues, it's actually an inherited condition? A sign that the coherent plot we're all desperately looking for? Well, it started unraveling a long, long time ago.
So let's start right here, in the present. We're going to look at our current era not just as a time of incredible technological change, but as an age that is fundamentally defined by suspicion and a deep sense of fragmentation.
This right here is the central argument we're going to unpack. The idea that our individual anxieties, our paranoia, it isn't just a bug in our personal software. What if it's actually a feature? A logical, almost inevitable response to the invisible historical context that we inhabit every single day. So, how does history actually get inside our heads? Well, the theory here basically flips a common assumption on its head. We usually think that illness makes history, sick leaders or sick societies. But this view posits that history itself can forge the very shape of our psychological illnesses. Okay, to really get this, we need a key term from Stefano Carta's work, the cultural complex. The best way to think about it is like a culture's collective psyche. It's this shared set of unconscious assumptions and emotional patterns that shapes how everyone in that culture thinks and feels and acts, usually without us even realizing it's there. And this quote from the ethnopsychiatrist Toby Nathan just nails it. A symptom, he says, is a text without context. Seeing a symptom like widespread paranoia is like reading a single, confusing line from a book. To have any hope of understanding it, you have to find the rest of the page, the rest of the story. And for us, that context is centuries of history. All right, so to see exactly how this works, let's turn to a story I guarantee you know, but maybe not in this light. The tale of Don Quixote. It's the perfect parable for the birth of the modern and, dare I say, paranoid mind. This chart really shows the massive, seismic shift that poor Don Quixote was trapped in. He was standing right on the fault line between two worlds. Behind him was the pre-modern world, an ordered, enchanted cosmos where everything had a unified meaning. But ahead of him was the emerging modern world, a world that felt confusing, deceptive, and totally fragmented. And this is where Carta just brilliantly breaks down the three-step logic that would come to define this new mindset. Step 1, perceive reality. Okay, he sees windmills. Step 2, cling to an ideal of what it should be. He believes with all his heart that they should be giants. So step 3, when reality disappoints, you don't question your ideal, no. Instead, you invent a hidden persecutor to explain the gap. An evil magician must be tricking you. And just like that, the conspiracy is born. And that's why Don Quixote is so much more than just a funny character. As the philosopher Georgi Lukács put it, he's the first great portrait of the alienated modern soul, a person left totally alone to invent meaning for himself, because the world outside no longer provides it. Now, this alienation wasn't just some literary theme. It was the end result of a massive, centuries-long intellectual project. We're now entering the era of what sociologists call the Great Disenchantment. And on this timeline, you can see the architects of that disenchantment. It starts with Luther challenging the ultimate authority of the church. Then you have Descartes grounding all of reality and certainty in the isolated mind. I think, therefore I am. Each step, piece by piece, dismantled that shared, meaningful cosmos, leading to what Max Weber would famously call the disenchantment of the world. So, what exactly did we lose in this process? The psychologist Carl Jung had a perfect word for it, the numinous. The numinous is that direct, powerful, goosebumps on your arm experience of awe, of mystery, of a reality that's just so much bigger than your own ego. For Jung, connecting with this was the source of all real meaning in life. And Jung could not have been more clear about what was at stake here. He wrote that access to the numinous is the real therapy. Losing that connection isn't just some philosophical problem. For him, it was the very definition of modern psychological illness. It's the curse of a soul that's been starved of meaning. Which finally brings us to today. How does this centuries-deep crisis of meaning actually show up in our daily lives, in a world of social media feeds and TikToks and endless consumer choice? Well, the first casualty of this disenchantment is a shared reality. I mean, look at this chart from Pew Research. It captures a huge turning point, the moment social media took over from print as a primary news source. Now, this wasn't just a change in how we get news. This was the moment we traded a common public square for millions of private, algorithmically fortified echo chambers. We effectively stopped living in the same world of facts. And you'd think, well, the solution is just to see more opposing views. But amazingly, research from Duke's Polarization Lab found the exact opposite happens online. More exposure often increases polarization. But why? Because in a world with no shared meaning, our online identity becomes the last fortress we have. We're not just passively consuming info, we are actively using it to defend a very fragile sense of self. The problem isn't the disagreement itself, it's the anonymous mass-scale context where it all happens. And so, we all become Don Quixote. In a world with no shared authorities, we have no choice but to become our own. We saddle up, ride out into the digital wilderness, and we curate a personal reality. A feed of facts and influencers that confirms whatever our chosen faith is. And anyone who challenges that faith, well, they're the evil magician. And this is how finding the historical context completely reframes our condition. The paranoia and the anxiety we feel, they aren't just a personal defect or a simple chemical imbalance. They are symptoms of a desperate search for meaning in a world that has been systematically stripped of it. This all leads us to a pretty provocative final question. If our world is inherently fragmented, if it's lacking in shared meaning, then maybe paranoia, a baseline suspicion towards a reality that feels deceptive, maybe it isn't an illness at all. Maybe it's just the new logical cost of being conscious in the 21st century. And that leaves us with this final thought. If our modern anxieties are a text without a context, then maybe the most radical, most healing act we can perform is to seek out that missing history. To understand that the fragmentation we feel in our own minds is just an echo of a much bigger story that began centuries ago. And understanding that story, well, that's the first step toward finally writing a new one.